Hi, everybody. It is time for us to move along in To Kill a Mockingbird. Last week, I said, I read aloud and I read live, and was really there. But there's just fine. It recorded, and it saves for a couple of days, so maybe you've seen it. And I said, go ahead and read chapter 9 on your own. I'm going to start with chapter 10 today, but I want to say about chapter 9 that it's important because it's the first time that Scout realizes that there are people who are hateful, like really hateful, about anybody who it happens to be black. And they're very hateful to her. They're hateful to her dad, who they say is defending somebody, which we're going to get into a little bit more with that. But Cecil says something and she doesn't quite understand it, and she talks to her dad about it, and he tries to kind of explain it without going into a lot of details. But we also meet her cousin Frances and her uncle Jack, and she and Frances get into a fight. She actually pummels him, and her uncle pulls her off and is very angry at her and very mean, and she gets herself incredibly upset. At the end, they get home and Uncle Jack and Atticus have a talk because Uncle Jack doesn't really feel very good about how he handled things with Scout, and how that he really didn't listen to her and listen to her side. He just assumed that she was in the wrong, and that Frances hadn't said anything to kind of provoke things. So we're going to start with chapter 10, and then I'll talk a little bit after it, and then I'll do another recording for chapter 11. So here we are on page 118, chapter 10. Atticus was feeble. Well, he was nearly 50. When Jem and I asked him why he was so old, he said he got started late, which he reflected upon his abilities and manliness. He was much older than the parents of our school contemporaries. There was nothing Jem or I could say about him when our classmates said, "Well, my father." Jem was football crazy, and Atticus was never too tired to play keep-away. But when Jem wanted to tackle him, Atticus would say, "I'm too old for that, son." Our father didn't do anything, and he worked in an office, not a drugstore. Atticus didn't drive a dump truck for the county. He was not the sheriff. He did not farm or work in a garage or do anything that could possibly arouse the admiration of anyone. Besides that, he wore glasses. He was nearly blind in his left eye, and said left eyes were the tribal curse of the Finches. Whenever he wanted to see something well, he turned his head and he looked from his right eye. He did not do the things our classmates' fathers did. He never went hunting. He did not play poker or fish or drink or smoke. He was in the living room. He sat in the living room and he read. With these attributes, however, he would not remain as inconspicuous as we wished him to. That year, the school buzzed with talk about him defending Tom Robinson, none of which was complimentary. After my bout with Cecil, when I committed myself to a policy of cowardness, word got around that Scout Finch wouldn't fight anymore. Her daddy wouldn't let her. Well, this was not entirely correct. I wouldn't fight publicly for Atticus, but the family was private ground. I would fight anyone, from third cousin upwards, tooth and nail. Francis Hancock, for example, knew that. When he gave us our air rifles, Atticus wouldn't teach us to shoot. Uncle Jack instructed us in the rudiments thereof. He said Atticus wasn't interested in guns. Atticus said to Jem one day, "I'd rather you shoot tin cans in the backyard, but I know that you'll go after birds. Shoot all the blue jays you want, if you can hit 'em, but remember, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." Well, that was the only time I'd ever heard Atticus say it was a sin to do something, and I asked Miss Maudie about it. Your father is right, she said. Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy. They don't eat at people's gardens, they don't nest in corn cribs, they don't do one thing but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. Miss Marty, this is an old neighborhood, ain't it? Well, been here longer than the town. No, I mean, the folks on our street are all old. Jem and me, we's the only kids around here. Mrs. Du Bois is close on to 100, Miss Rachel's old, and so are you and Atticus. Well, I don't call 50 very old, Miss Marty said tartly. Not being wheeled around yet, am I? Neither is your father. But I must say Providence was kind enough to burn down that old mausoleum of mine. I'm too old to keep it up. Maybe you're right, June Louise. This is a settled neighborhood. You've never been around young folks much, have you? Well, yes, I'm at school. I mean, young grown-ups. You're lucky, you know. You and Jem have the benefit of your father's age. If your father was 30, you'd find life quite different. I'm sure I would. Atticus can't do anything. Well, you'd be surprised, said Miss Marty. There's life in him yet. Well, what can he do? Well, he can make somebody's will so airtight, can't anybody meddle with it. Shoot. Well, did you know he's the best checker player in this town? Why, down at the landing when we were coming up, Atticus Finch could beat anybody on both sides of the river. Good Lord, Miss Marty, Jem and me beat him all the time. Well, it's about time you found out it's because he let you. And did you know that he can play a Jew's harp? Well, this modish accomplishment served to make me even more ashamed of him. Well, I said. Well, what, Miss Marty? Well, nothing. Nothing, it seems, was all that you'd be proud of him. Can't everybody play a Jew's harp? Now keep out of the way of the carpenters, and you'd better go home. I'll be in my azaleas, and can't watch you. Plague might hit you. I went to the backyard, and I found Jem plugging away in a tin can, which seemed stupid with all the blue jays around. I returned to the front yard, and I busied myself for 2 hours erecting a complicated breastwork at the side of the porch, consisting of a tire, an orange crate, the laundry hamper, the porch chairs, and a small U.S. flag Jem gave me from a popcorn box. When Atticus came home to dinner, he found me crouched down aiming across the street. What are you shooting at? Miss Marty's rear end. Atticus turned and saw my generous target bending over her bushes. He pushed his hat to the back of his head and crossed the street. Miss Marty, he called, I thought I'd warn you there's a considerable peril. Miss Marty straightened up and looked toward me, and she said, Atticus, you are a devil from hell. When Atticus returned, he told me to break camp. Don't you ever let me catch you pointing that gun at anybody again, he said. I wish my father was a devil from hell. I sounded out Calpurnia on the subject. Mr. Finch? Why, he can do lots of things. Like what? I asked. Calpurnia scratched her head. Well, I don't rightly know, she said. Jem underlined it when he asked Atticus if he was going out for the Methodists, and Atticus said he'd break his neck if he did. He said he was just too old for that sort of thing. The Methodists were trying to pay off their church mortgage, and they challenged the Baptists to a game of touch football. Everybody in town's dad was playing, it seemed, except Atticus. Jem said that he didn't even want to go, but he was unable to resist football in any form. He stood gloomily on the sidelines with Atticus, and he watched Cecil, Jacob's father, make touchdowns for the Baptists. One Saturday, Jem and I decided to go exploring with our air rifles to see if we could find a rabbit or a squirrel. We'd gone about 500 yards beyond the Radley place when I noticed Jem squinting at something down the street. He turned his head to one side and was looking out the corner of his eyes. What you doing? That old dog down yonder, he said. That's old Tim Johnson, ain't it? Yeah. Tim Johnson was the property of Mr. Harry Johnson, who drove the mobile bus and lived on the southern edge of the town. Tim was a liver-colored bird dog, the pet of Maycomb. Well, what's he doing? I don't know, Scout. We better go home. Oh, Jem, it's February. I don't care. I'm going to tell Cal. Well, we raced home and ran to the kitchen. "Cal," said Jem, "can you come down the sidewalk a minute?" "Oh, what for, Jem? I can't come down the sidewalk every time you want me." "Well, there's something wrong with an old dog down yonder." Calpurnia sighed. "I can't wrap up any dog's foot now. There's some gauze in the bathroom. You go get it and do it yourself." Jem shook his head. "He's sick, Cal. Something's wrong with him." "Well, what's he doing? Trying to catch his tail?" "No, he's doing like this." Jem gulped like a goldfish, and he hunched his shoulders, and he twisted his torso, and he's going like that, only like he means to. "Are you telling a story, Jem Finch?" Calpurnia's voice hardened. "No, Cal, I swear I'm not." "Was he running?" "No, he's just moseying along so slow you can't hardly tell. He's coming this way." Calpurnia rinsed her hands and followed Jem into the yard. "I don't see any dog," she said. She followed us beyond the Radley place, and she looked where Jem pointed. Tim Johnson was not much more than a speck in the distance, but he was closer to us. He walked erratically, as if his right legs were shorter than his left legs. He reminded me of a card stuck in a sandbed. "He's gone lopsided," Jem said. Calpurnia stared, and then grabbed us by the shoulder and ran us home. She shut the wood door behind us, went to the telephone, and shouted, "Give me Mr. Finch's office." "Mr. Finch?" she shouted. "This is Cal. I swear to God there's a mad dog down the street a piece. He's coming this way." "Yes, sir, Mr. Finch, I declare he's old Tim Johnson." "Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir." She hung up. She shook her head when we tried to ask what Atticus had said. She rattled the telephone hook and she said, "Miss Eula May, now, ma'am, I'm through talking to Mr. Finch. Please don't connect me no more. Listen, Miss Eula May, can you call Miss Rachel, Miss Stephanie, and whoever got a phone on this street and tell 'em a mad dog's coming? Please, ma'am." Calpurnia listened. "I know it's February, Miss Eula May, but I know a mad dog when I see one. Oh, please, ma'am, hurry." Calpurnia asked Jem, "Radley's got a phone?" Jem looked in the book, and he said, "No, they won't come out anyway, Cal." "Well, I don't care. I'm going to tell 'em." She ran to the front porch, Jem and I at her heels. "You stay at the house," she yelled. Calpurnia's message had been received by the neighbors. Every wood door within our range of vision had closed tight. We saw no trace of Tim Johnson. We watched Calpurnia running toward the Radley place, holding her skirts and apron above her knee. And she went up to the front porch and she banged on the door. She got no answer and she shouted, "Mr. Nathan, Mr. Arthur, mad dog's coming, a mad dog's coming." "She's supposed to go round and back," I said. Jem shook his head. "Don't make any difference now," he said. Calpurnia pounded on the door in vain. No one acknowledged her warning. No one seemed to have heard it. As Calpurnia sprinted to the back porch, a black Ford swung into the driveway. Atticus and Mr. Heck Tate got out. Mr. Heck Tate was the sheriff of Macomb County. He was as tall as Atticus, but thinner. He was long-nosed, with wore boots with shining metal eye holes, boot pants, and a lumber jacket. His belt had a row of bullets sticking in it, and he carried a heavy rifle. When he and Atticus reached the porch, Jem opened the door. "To stay inside, son," said Atticus. "Where is he, Cal?" "He ought to be here by now," said Cal, pointing down the street. "Not running, is he?" asked Mr. Tate. "No, sir. He's in the twitching stage, Mr. Heck." "Should we go after him, Heck?" "We better wait, Mr. Finch. They usually go in a straight line, but you can never tell. He might follow the curve. Hope he doesn't, or he'll go straight into the Radley backyard. Well, let's wait a minute." "Don't think he'll go in the Radley yard," said Atticus. "Fence will stop him. He'll probably follow the road." "I thought mad dogs foamed at the mouth and galloped and leaped and lunged at throats, and I thought they did it in August. Had Tim Johnson behaved thus, I would have been less frightened." Nothing is more deadly than a deserted waiting street. The trees were still. The mockingbirds were silent. The carpenters at Miss Maudie's house had vanished. I heard Mr. Tate sniff and then blow his nose. I saw him shift his gun to the crook of his arm. I saw Miss Maudie Crawford's face framed in the glass window of her front door, and Miss Maudie appeared and stood beside her. Atticus put his foot on the rung of a chair, and he rubbed his hand slowly down the side of his thigh. "There he is," he said softly. Tim Johnson came into sight, walking dazedly in the inner rim of a curve parallel to the Radley house. "Look at him," whispered Jem. "Mr. Heck said that they walk in a straight line. He can't even stay in the road." "He looks more sick than anything," I said. "Let anything get in front of him, and he'll come straight at it." Mr. Tate put his hands on his forehead, and he leaned forward. "He's got it all right, Mr. Finch." Tim Johnson was advancing at a snail's pace, but he was not playing or sniffing at foliage. He seemed dedicated to one course, and motivated by an invisible force that was inching towards us. We could see him shiver like a horse shedding flies. His jaw opened and shut. He was list, and when he was being pulled gradually towards us. "Mr. Tate, he's looking for a place to die," said Jem. Mr. Tate looked around. "He's far from dead, Jem. He hasn't got started yet." Tim Johnson reached the side street that ran in front of the Radley place, and what remained of his poor mind made him pause and seem to consider which road he'd take. He made a few hesitant steps and stopped in front of the Radley gate, and he tried to turn around, but he was having difficulty. Atticus said, "He's within range, Heck. You better get him before he goes down the side street. Lord knows who's around the corner. Now go inside, Cal." Calpurnia opened the screen door, latched it behind her, and then unlatched it and held on to the hook. She tried to block Jem and me with her body, but we looked out from beneath her arms. "You take him, Mr. Finch." Mr. Tate handed the rifle to Atticus. Jem and I nearly fainted. "Don't waste time, Heck," said Atticus. "Go on." "Mr. Finch, this is a one-shot job." Atticus shook his head vehemently. "Now don't just stand there, Heck. We can't wait all day. For God's sake, Mr. Finch, look where he is. And you'll go straight into the Radley house. I can't shoot that well, and you know it." "I haven't shot a gun in 30 years. Mr. Tate almost threw the rifle at Atticus. "Well, I'd feel mighty comfortable if you did it now," he said. In a fog, Jem and I watched our father take the gun and walk out into the middle of the street. He walked quietly, but I thought he moved like an underwater swimmer. Time had slowed to a nauseating crawl. And when Atticus raised his glasses, Calpurnia murmured, "Sweet Jesus, help him," and she put her hands to her cheeks. Atticus pushed his glasses to his forehead. They slipped down, and he dropped them in the street. In the silence, I heard him crack. Atticus rubbed his eyes and shin, and we saw him blink hard. In front of the Radley gate, Tim Johnson had made up what was left of his mind, and he'd finally turned himself around to pursue his original course up our street. He made 2 steps forward and then stopped and raised his head, and we saw his body go rigid. And with movement so swift it seemed simultaneous, Atticus' hand yanked a ball-tipped lever as he brought the gun to his shoulder, and the rifle cracked. Tim Johnson leapt, flopped over, and crumpled on the sidewalk in a brown and white heap. He didn't know what hit him. Mr. Tate jumped off the porch, and he ran to the Radley place, and he stepped in front of the dog, squatted, turned around, and tapped his finger on the forehead just above his left eye. "You were a little to the right, Mr. Finch," he called. "Always was," answered Atticus. "If I had my druthers, I'd take a shotgun." He stopped, and he picked up his glasses, ground the broken lens to powder under his heels, and he went to Mr. Tate and stood down looking at Tim Johnson. Doors opened one by one, and the neighbors came slowly alive. Miss Maudie walked down the steps with Miss Stephanie Crawford. Jem was paralyzed. I pinched him to get him moving, but when Atticus saw us coming, he called, "Stay where you are." When Mr. Tate and Atticus returned to the yard, Mr. Tate was smiling. "I'll have Zebo collect him," he said. "You haven't forgotten much, Mr. Finch. They'll say it never leaves you." Atticus was silent. "Atticus," said Jem. "Yes?" "Nothing." "I saw that one shot, Finch. Atticus wheeled around and he faced Miss Maudie. They looked at one another without saying anything. That Atticus got it, and Atticus got into the sheriff's car. "Come on," he said to Jem. "Now don't go near that dog, you understand? Don't go near him. He's just as dangerous dead as alive." "Yes, sir," Jem said. "Atticus?" "What, son?" "Nothing." "Well, what's the matter with you, boy? Can't you talk?" said Mr. Tate, grinning at Jem. "Don't you know that your daddy's—" "Hush, heck," said Atticus. "Let's go to town." When they drove away, Jem and I went to Miss Stephanie's front door steps, and we sat waiting for Zeebo to arrive in the garbage truck. Jem sat in numb confusion, and Miss Stephanie said, Who'd have thought a mad dog in February? Maybe he wasn't mad. Maybe he was just crazy. I'd hate to see Harry Johnson's face when he gets in from the mobile run and finds Atticus's Finch shot his dog. Bet he was full of fleas from somewhere. Miss Maudie and Miss Stephanie be singing a different tune if Tim Johnson was still coming up the street, that they'd find out soon enough. They'd send his head off to Montgomery. Jem became vaguely articulate. "Did you see him, Scout? Did you see him just standing there, and all of a sudden he just relaxed all over in it, and it looked like that gun was a part of him, and he did it quick, like I have to aim for 10 minutes before I can hit it something." And Miss Maudie grinned wickedly. "Well now, Miss Jean Louise," she said, "still think your father can't do anything? Still ashamed of him?" "No," I said meekly. "Forgot to tell you the other day that, besides playing the Jew's harp, Atticus Finch was the deadest shot in Maycomb County in his time." "Dead shot," echoed Jem. "That's what I said, Jem Finch. Guess you'll change your tune now. The very idea. Didn't you know his nickname was Old One Shot when he was a boy? Why, down at the landing when he was coming up, if he shot 15 times, he hit 14 doves, he'd complain about wasting ammunition." "Never said anything about that," Jem muttered. "Never said anything about it, did he?" "No." "Wonder why he never goes hunting now," I said. "Well, maybe I can tell you," said Miss Maudie. "If your father's anything, he's civilized in his heart. Marksmanship's a gift of God, a talent. Oh, you have to practice to make it perfect, but shooting's different from playing the piano or the like. I think maybe he put his gun down when he realized that God had given him an unfair advantage over most living things. I guess he decided he wouldn't shoot till he had to. And he had to today." "Looks like he'd be proud of it," I said. "People in their right minds never take pride in their talents," said Miss Maudie. We saw Zeebo drive up. He took a pitchfork from the back of the garbage truck and gingerly lifted Tom Johnson. He pitched the dog into the truck, and then he poured something from a gallon jug on and around the spot where Tim fell. "And don't you come around here for a while," he called. And when we went home, I told Jem that we'd really have something to talk about at school on Monday, and Jem turned on me. "Don't you say anything about it, Scout," he said. "What? Well, I certainly am. Ain't anybody's daddy the deadliest shot in Maycomb County." Jem said, "I reckon if he wanted us to know, he'd have told us. If he was proud of it, he'd have told us." "Well, maybe it just slipped his mind," I said. "Nah, Scout. Something you wouldn't understand. Atticus is real old, but I wouldn't care if he couldn't do anything. I wouldn't care if he couldn't do a blessed thing." And Jem picked up a rock, and he threw it jubilantly at the car house. Running after him, he called back, "Atticus is a gentleman, like me." And that is the end of the chapter. So Jem really changed his tune about Atticus once he found out about the shooting. Not just the shooting, but what Miss Maudie said, that it was a natural gift, his ability to shoot like he does. And that he felt, and I don't know if Atticus ever said this to Miss Maudie, or maybe he did, or maybe she just knew him really well. But it was quite an unfair advantage for him to be such a great shot and for other living creatures to not have a chance. Very unique, very different. But he steps out in the street, takes off his glasses. Why did he grind that glass into the street even after they broke? I think it's because he didn't want to have broken shards of glass in the street for anyone to get hurt. This is the type of man he is. He is capable of a lot, but he doesn't push a lot. He doesn't accept money from people when they don't have money. He lets them pay off in goods and services and pay it off in their own time. He is defending Tom Robinson, who is a black man. Despite all of the harassment that is going to be happening, despite that his sister isn't happy with it, despite that people around aren't happy with it, this is the type of man he is. And we're starting to see a real difference between Jem and Scout in their ages. We are with Scout. This is coming from her point of view. But we see Jem starting to age up and change. He doesn't want Scout around all the time. He doesn't tell her everything. And he's starting to see the world a little bit differently. This will probably come to Scout too as she gets older, but not quite yet. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off, and the next thing you'll see will be the next video, me reading chapter 11.